Project-based learning is at the core of our curriculum, so we aimed to demonstrate the benefits and validity of this to our community in a week-long, student-led project. The Unexpected is an arts festival in Fort Smith, just entering its second year, where murals are painted by internationally recognized artists on buildings throughout downtown. Members of the community had expressed that a mobile app would be helpful in navigating these murals. Our students were tasked with building and designing this app. Their first task was to understand the problem, inside and out. They began by brainstorming the characteristics of successful and unsuccessful apps, and then by touring the murals and asking questions of the festival director as their client. In a lucky turn of events, they encountered two tourists who were trying to find their way around the murals with a printed paper map. The students were able to ask questions and get feedback on what other people might want to see in a mobile app. On the surface, project-based learning looks so different from what we're used to seeing in traditional classrooms, and it's easy to think that real learning isn't happening, but nothing could be further from the truth. By selecting a real, existing problem in the world, students become even more involved members of the community. They are developing skills that will make them marketable when they enter the job market, and they are learning to work with other people and consolidating existing skills from a vast range of disciplines. However, because these projects aren't set in a typical classroom, assessment can be a trickier proposal. Yes, a functional product at the end of the event is the most tangible form of assessment. But in PBL, assessment is constantly ongoing. The teacher or facilitator must always be checking in with students to gauge the group dynamic. Once the students had a handle on all of the problems, they had to shift towards focusing on a solution. They began by brainstorming all the ideas that came to them for what would be useful in this app, from the mundane to the completely off the wall. They then sorted and prioritized their ideas, selecting the most important and the most feasible, but maintaining all their ideas to come back to in future. Now, with their to-do list, it was time to team up. A development team would be responsible for the building and structure of the app. The content team would be involved in creating the words and pictures that populated the app. While they didn't know it, by this stage of the process, they had already begun to touch on a number of Common Core standards, primarily in the speaking and listening category. They had started their serious work on the comprehension and collaboration component of their project. Their preliminary research meant evaluating information in an unconventional format, and their planning process required incorporating work from ideas coming from their peers. And in order to assess their progress, I made sure everyone was participating, that voices were being heard, and I asked questions that ensured that this was happening when needed. I also ensured that they didn't bite off more than they could chew, but that they also didn't sell themselves short. And thankfully, this team had no intention of selling themselves short. Their next step was to execute that solution. The students tackled this part of the project by really drawing on their teamwork. They created team-specific goals, and they broke their tasks into milestones that they needed to achieve on self-imposed deadlines. They began creating content and actually building an app. They researched the artists and murals. They photographed the murals. The development team outlined their structure and began building a database. And most crucially, each team updated the other teams on their progress at the beginning and end of each day to remain accountable to the timeline. Beginning of the day updates were required because these students had become so invested in their projects that they were working on them from home in the evenings, entirely unprompted by us. This is where the biggest portion of what is recognizable to most of us as traditional learning took place, though it was still in this untraditional context. As Common Core standards go, they touched on nearly all of the writing anchor standards, producing, researching, considering their audience over a span of time, and in their research, they were forced to consider the sources that they were using. And the students working on the coding side of things were tackling some of the computer science coding skills that have now become a required part of high school education in the state of Arkansas. The beginning and ending updates for each day were my primary mode of assessment at this point, as it helped ensure students remained on task. The next step was to refine the solution. This involved proofing their own work and revisiting earlier steps as needed. The teams exchanged work, proofed each other's product, provided feedback, and tested the app to find places that needed more work. Each team worked to evaluate and incorporate the useful feedback that they received, and then repeated this proofing process over again as many times as was necessary. The Common Core's speaking and listening anchor standards not only call for collaboration, as mentioned earlier, but integrating and evaluating information. And the writing anchors include planning and revising, editing and reconsidering. Various forms of distribution are addressed as well, and the students have indeed been developing up to this point a digital mode of distribution. Once again, assessment at this stage included monitoring a progression and change in the product on its way to completion. The final stage included a presentation. We invited the Mural Festival director, as well as members of the public, to view the students' presentation. This gave the students an opportunity to review and reflect on the steps they'd taken while crafting a slideshow and demonstration of the completed app. They practiced several times for visitors who stopped in to see what the students were doing. This included our Chamber of Commerce president and the chancellor of the local university, both of whom gave valuable feedback that the students incorporated before giving the final presentation to the public. Every one of the speaking and listening Common Core anchor standards was addressed, and their use of reflection, the progression of the presentation, and ultimately the final product provided modes of assessment at this stage. So not only did this project show our community what project-based learning looks like and the pedagogical soundness of the approach, it also showed our community what amazing things our students can do when given the opportunity and guidance.